There's a quiet kind of despair that doesn't come from tragedy or failure, but from something far more insidious. The subtle feeling that you are living a life that was never meant for you. That no matter how much you try, no matter how many boxes you tick, no matter how perfectly you play the role, the core of your being is still restless. You wake up, perform, achieve, strive. And yet deep down, something feels off. Like you've been dropped into the wrong movie, cast in a part you never auditioned for. And the scariest part? Everyone around you acts like this is normal. Maybe you've tried changing jobs, cities, partners. Maybe you've journaled, meditated, manifested under full moons, and made all the vision boards. But nothing sticks. Nothing truly clicks. It's like there's a glitch in the matrix of your life, and you're the only one who can feel it. This isn't about laziness, lack of clarity, or not working hard enough. No, this is something far deeper. This is what happens when your soul is out of sync with the timeline it's currently stuck in. What if you've spent your whole life trying to succeed at something you were never meant to be part of? What if all your effort has been poured into surviving someone else's story, someone else's values, fears, desires, even karma? What if your life right now is the result of energetic programming, external expectations, and unconscious contracts that you didn't even know you agreed to? That subtle ache, that sense of dissonance you've been feeling, it's not dysfunction. It's the sound of your true self knocking, asking to be remembered. Because deep within you exists a version of your life that is coherent, electric, aligned. A timeline where things may not be perfect, but they are true. In that life, your energy flows instead of fights. Your identity expands instead of contracts. And every step you take doesn't feel like effort. It feels like remembering. This isn't just a spiritual idea or poetic metaphor. It's grounded in everything from quantum mechanics to soul psychology. You're not broken. You're just entangled in the wrong frequency, trapped in a narrative that isn't yours. And that can change, not with more hustle, but with more truth. So if a part of you has always whispered, "This isn't my real life," then you're not alone. And you're not crazy. You're waking up. And the first step is recognizing the signals, the symptoms that reveal you've been pulled into someone else's timeline. In the next section, we'll uncover these subtle yet powerful clues and help you start remembering the life that was always meant to be yours. There are moments in life when nothing seems obviously wrong, but everything feels undeniably off. You go through the motions, fulfill expectations, play your roles, and check the boxes. Yet an invisible thread of misalignment weaves through every part of your existence. You may have a stable job, a functional relationship, a structured routine, and a sense of order that others would envy. And still, something inside you feels strangely vacant, like your days are being lived behind a glass wall. You can see life, you can interact with it, but you can't quite touch the truth of it. The texture of your reality feels thin, as if you're acting out a life written by someone else, spoken in a language that was never quite yours. Perhaps you've never truly felt at home anywhere. Even as a child, there might have been a strange disconnection between your inner world and the environment you were born into. You looked around at the rules, the rhythms, the roles, and thought, silently, "Something about this doesn't fit me." But when you voiced that inner dissonance, you were often met with confusion, denial, or even shame. So you learned to adapt, you learned to blend, you learned to suppress the strange music of your soul, just enough to pass for someone who belonged. And yet, no matter how deeply you've buried that voice, it resurfaces. Quietly at first in the form of chronic boredom, emotional numbness, or a low-grade existential ache that no success seems to soothe. Over time, it becomes harder to ignore. The discomfort evolves into full-blown fatigue. You're tired, not just physically, but spiritually. Tired of striving for things that don't matter to you. Tired of maintaining relationships that drain you. Tired of chasing goals that used to impress others, but now leave you hollow. Maybe you've even experienced patterns of loss, collapse, or self-sabotage that seem inexplicable on the surface. Relationships fall apart just when they seem secure. Projects crumble after months of effort. Your energy swings between bursts of hope and deep apathy. At times you may blame yourself, wondering if you're lazy, ungrateful, or broken. But the truth is often more profound than psychology can explain. It's not that you failed. It's that you're operating inside the wrong timeline. One where your soul's frequency is constantly clashing with the life you're trying to live. Living in a distorted timeline feels like trying to breathe in an atmosphere that wasn't made for you. Even joy feels temporary, like a sugar high. Your creativity flickers, then fades. Your sense of purpose is either absent or fragmented. And when you try to fix things, you often end up rearranging the furniture in a burning house. Busy, productive, but still lost. There is a growing awareness that something more fundamental is missing. And that missing thing is coherence. Coherence is not about everything going right externally. It's a felt sense that who you are and how you're living are finally speaking the same language. That your inner world and outer world are no longer fighting each other. And when that coherence is absent, your entire system suffers. Mentally, you feel confused. Emotionally, you feel fragmented. Energetically, you feel stuck in molasses. Spiritually, you feel like a stranger to your own destiny. Sometimes, this misalignment shows up in more subtle ways. You're surrounded by people, but feel deeply alone. You get everything you thought you wanted, but feel nothing. You do the right things, but end up with the wrong results. You sense that your life is being lived on a script that was written by someone else, maybe long before you were even born. These are not small symptoms. These are the quiet alarms of the soul, and the longer they are ignored, the louder they become. The universe doesn't punish you with suffering, it redirects you through it. The discomfort you feel is not a failure of manifestation, motivation, or mindset. It is the intelligence of your inner being trying to lead you back to yourself. But to follow it, you must be willing to consider a radical possibility: that the life you're living isn't your true life at all. This is not about making you doubt everything. It's about helping you finally question what should have been questioned a long time ago. Who chose this life? Who wrote this story? Whose voice is narrating your mind when you make decisions? When you feel guilt? When you hesitate to change? Are you living in alignment or in reaction? As you sit with these questions, you might feel resistance rising. That's normal. Your current timeline has momentum. It has roots, emotional, psychological, even ancestral. It's been reinforced by years of repetition and identity. But that doesn't make it true. It only makes it familiar. And there is a world of difference between what is familiar and what is real. You might be afraid that if you let go of this life, there will be nothing left. That if you dismantle the structure that has held you for so long, you'll fall into chaos. But what if the structure itself is what's suffocating you? What if the discomfort is not a signal to try harder, but a call to awaken? Because once you see the signs, you can't unsee them. And once you realize that you're living inside a false timeline, the question is no longer whether change is possible. It's how to shift. But before we talk about how to change, we must understand why you ended up here in the first place. Because you didn't just wake up one day and decide to live someone else's life. There were forces, energetic, psychological, even quantum, that pulled you off your original course. And now, in the next section, we'll uncover those hidden forces. We'll explore how you got entangled in a story that was never truly yours, and what that means for the path ahead. It's easy to believe that the life you're living now is the result of your own choices. After all, that's what we've been told since childhood. That our decisions shape our destiny. That free will is the steering wheel of life. But what if that's only part of the truth? What if long before you had the language to say yes or no, long before you were even conscious of choice, a set of invisible hands was already sketching the blueprint of the story you'd be forced to inhabit? Most people don't realize that the mind they're using to make decisions was conditioned by forces outside themselves. Parents, teachers, religion, media, generational trauma. They all contribute to a silent architecture, building your inner world before you ever get to question it. And so, by the time you begin to ask, "Who am I really?" the answer has already been whispered to you 1,000 times, embedded into your nervous system, coded into your emotional responses, hardwired into your subconscious through repetition, fear, and unmet needs. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to become aware of it. There is something called energetic entanglement, a principle borrowed from quantum physics but profoundly relevant to the soul. It suggests that once two energies have been in contact, they remain connected, influencing each other's behavior, no matter how far apart they drift. In human terms, this explains why you may still feel beholden to your family's expectations even after moving halfway across the world. It's why some belief systems keep echoing in your choices long after you've stopped believing in them consciously. The past doesn't let go just because you grew up, not when it lives inside you as programming. But there's more. Beyond the psychological structures and social frameworks lies an even deeper mechanism: the soul contract. According to many spiritual traditions, including those explored by Carolyn Myss and Danielle MacKinnon, each soul enters this world with certain agreements. Some are conscious and chosen: lessons, growth paths, service missions. Others are inherited or absorbed: burdens passed down from ancestors, unresolved karmic debts, and energetic blueprints picked up from the collective. You may have agreed to incarnate into a particular family, culture, or even traumatic scenario, not because you deserved suffering, but because your soul knew it could transform through it. However, along the way, it's possible to get lost in the pain, to become so identified with survival that you forget the original intention. And when memory of that original contract is lost, you begin to mistake the cage for your character. The result is a timeline that you didn't consciously choose, a life that feels more like a reaction than a creation, a pattern of repetition that keeps cycling through the same types of relationships, the same types of failures, the same kind of emptiness, even when the faces and places change. This isn't randomness. This is resonance. You are locked into a frequency that keeps attracting what your nervous system has learned to call home, even when that home is built on abandonment, betrayal, or inadequacy. There is no amount of productivity, affirmation, or hustle that can override this frequency. Because manifestation doesn't begin in the mind, it begins in the field. And your field, your energetic reality, is shaped by unresolved contracts and unconscious programming. Until these contracts are brought to the surface, you will continue to recreate the same story under different disguises. This is why some people can read every book on self-help, attend every seminar, and still end up in the same emotional loop, because they're trying to build a new life on top of an old timeline. But true transformation doesn't come from layering new thoughts on top of old wounds. It comes from tracing the wound to its source and declaring, "This is where it ends." To escape the timeline that was never yours, you must first understand the architecture of the prison. It's not made of steel and stone. It's made of inherited stories, guilt, fear of abandonment, energetic debts, and identities that served someone else's survival, not your expansion. You didn't build this cage alone, but you're the only one who can dismantle it. And here's the paradox. The bars of this prison often look like love, like loyalty, like responsibility, like culture, like tradition, which is why breaking free can feel like betrayal. But betraying a lie is not a sin. It is an act of liberation. And if something deep within you has always felt like it doesn't belong, not just to your family or your job or your community, but to the entire structure of your current life, then maybe that's because your soul was never meant to remain here. Maybe your original contract expired and you stayed out of habit. This awareness alone won't magically change your reality, but it opens a door that has been hidden behind layers of identity and obligation. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you feel the vibration of truth, You can't go back to pretending you don't hear it. But now comes the most important turning point in this journey. Awareness is not enough. You've seen the symptoms. You've begun to understand the root. The next step is where everything changes, or stays the same. The next step is choice. Because from here, you must decide whether to keep living a borrowed timeline or to collapse the false identity completely. You must be willing to stop tweaking the script and start walking off the stage. And to do that, you need a different kind of power. Not the kind that pushes harder, but the kind that shifts deeper. In the next section, we'll reveal why the old methods, positive thinking, hustle, identity hacking, don't work when you're misaligned at the soul level. We'll explore why your efforts keep looping you back into the same reality, and how the only real exit is not external at all, but internal. Get ready to discover what truly blocks transformation and how to finally move beyond it. For anyone caught in the wrong timeline, the instinct is often to fix it through action. You try harder. You make a new plan. You wake up earlier, journal more, read better books, repeat stronger affirmations, build better habits. You tell yourself that this time will be different, that this time you'll finally feel like yourself. But again and again, despite all your effort, you land in the same emotional gravity: exhaustion, confusion, quiet desperation. It's like trying to repaint a house with cracked foundations. The colors change, but the cracks always return. The truth is, most of the methods that people use to change their lives are built on the very identity that needs to be released. You are trying to evolve while keeping the version of you that was shaped by misalignment. You are trying to manifest a life of authenticity from a self that was built for approval. And that doesn't work. It never truly has. Because when your identity is built on a false timeline, one shaped by inherited programming, unmet trauma, and external expectations, then no matter how much you upgrade your thinking, your inner system is still rooted in survival. Your nervous system doesn't respond to logic, it responds to safety. And if your internal blueprint equates safety with playing small, staying stuck, or betraying yourself to belong, then every conscious effort to change becomes a silent war inside your own body. That's why positive thinking alone won't save you. That's why vision boards eventually collect dust. That's why you can recite affirmations every morning and still feel like you're lying to yourself. The frequency of your actions cannot override the frequency of your being. And you don't get what you want. You get what you are. So many people walk around trying to upgrade their reality without ever questioning the identity they're using to do it. They're asking, how can I improve my life? When the real question should be, who is the one trying to improve it? Because if it's still the version of you that was built in reaction to fear, rejection, or conditioning, then all you're doing is reinforcing the timeline that is already hurting you. This is the failure point that no one talks about in self-development circles. That success without alignment is just a more polished prison. That healing without identity collapse often becomes another performance. And that if you're trying to live your soul's timeline from the identity built by survival, your growth will always be partial. You'll taste glimpses of transformation, but never the full embodiment. You'll feel better for a while, then worse than before. This isn't about blaming the tools. It's about understanding the context. Tools like affirmations, goal setting, or habit tracking only work when they are used by the right version of you. They are amplifiers, not transformers. They cannot create coherence where there is conflict. They cannot build truth on top of a false self. What's needed is not more information or more effort. What's needed is a shift in essence, a quantum shift. And this kind of shift doesn't come from adding more layers to who you are. It comes from peeling them away. It comes from recognizing that the self you've been working so hard to fix was never the real you. It was a placeholder, a mask, a set of strategies you learned to stay safe, accepted, and functional in a timeline that never fit your soul. The mistake we've all been trained to make is to solve life's pain by fixing symptoms. to go faster, when what we need is to go deeper. But when the source of your misalignment is identity level, then your only real choice is to begin again from the inside out. Not as an upgrade, not as a reinvention, but as a return to the original frequency your soul was meant to carry. That's where real coherence begins. This coherence is not about perfection or performance. It's about resonance. It's the moment when your thoughts, emotions, choices, and energy are no longer pulling in different directions. It's when who you are, what you want, and what you do start to echo each other. That's when timelines shift. Not because you force them to, but because your energy no longer matches the old story. Reality bends to coherence the way water bends to gravity. Naturally. Inevitably. If you've been stuck in cycles that never seem to break, despite your best effort, maybe it's time to stop trying to fix the cycle. Maybe it's time to collapse the identity that keeps creating it. Maybe the way forward isn't more doing, but deeper being. Maybe it's not more knowledge, but more remembering. So, what does that look like in practice? How do you stop living from a false identity and start aligning with your true timeline? How do you move from effort into resonance? The next part of this journey is not conceptual. It's practical. It's about embodiment. It's about stepping into a process of quiet undoing, of asking better questions, of learning to hear your own frequency again. Because it's one thing to know you're misaligned. It's another thing entirely to know how to return. And that return doesn't happen by chance. It happens through precise, conscious choices, made from a new place within. Not from the old self, desperate to escape, but from the soul that's finally ready to come home. In the next section, we'll explore exactly how to begin that process. You'll learn the practical steps to collapse false identity, align your inner field, and re-enter the timeline that was always meant to be yours. Not through striving, but through remembering. Not by chasing the future, but by reclaiming the self you were before the distortion. Prepare to shift, not incrementally, but quantumly. The moment you stop trying to fix yourself and start listening instead, something shifts. Not outside, but deep within the field of your being. It's subtle at first, like the soft hum beneath noise that's always been there, waiting for you to get quiet enough to hear it. That hum is your coherence. It's the memory of who you were before you learned to become who you're not. And that hum holds the key to your original timeline, the one that fits like a second skin, the one your soul has never stopped yearning to return to. To shift timelines isn't about forcing the universe to deliver a new life. It's about becoming a new signal. Because in a universe governed by frequency, you don't attract what you fantasize about. You attract what you broadcast. If your current life is out of alignment, it's because the frequency you've been transmitting is distorted. Not because you're bad, broken, or behind, but because you've been living through the lens of someone else's story, and the signal you're sending out doesn't match the essence of who you really are. When the broadcast is false, the reality that mirrors it will be too. That's where this shift begins. Not in action, but in attunement. It begins by recognizing that the version of you who has been trying to change your life is often the very version that needs to dissolve. The self that has been performing to survive cannot be the one who leads you into your truth. A quantum shift happens not when you try harder, but when you collapse what is no longer you. The false identity doesn't need more strategies. It needs a funeral. That's where most people hesitate. Because collapsing identity sounds like death. And in many ways, it is. It's the death of the good child, the overachiever, the one who sacrifices to please, the one who swallows their voice to keep the peace, the one who smiles while dying inside. These selves served a purpose. They protected you. They allowed you to stay attached, functional, relevant in environments that could not hold the full truth of your soul. But they are not you. And the longer you let them lead, the more distorted your timeline will become. So how do you collapse what no longer serves and shift into coherence? It starts with radical detachment. You must become willing to let go of everything you've built that was rooted in misalignment. That might mean a career, a belief system, a role in a family, or even a version of yourself you've spent years trying to perfect. This is not an act of recklessness. It's an act of precision. It's the decision to stop investing energy into the maintenance of distortion. From that detachment comes space. And in that space, your original frequency begins to rise. It will come in waves. Memories that aren't quite memories. Desires that feel too wild to be rational. Feelings of déjà vu when you imagine futures that don't yet exist. These are signals, invitations. Your only job is to stop dismissing them. Listen to what lights you up. Notice what drains you. Pay attention to the version of you that feels effortless, true, raw, even if it makes no sense. That's your compass. That's your coherence speaking. The next step is soul listening. This isn't about thinking your way into the right timeline. It's about sensing your way there. Soul language is subtle. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It's felt in the body, not debated in the mind. When you feel resonance, a quiet certainty, a grounded clarity, that's the signal. When you feel friction, contraction, or obligation, that's not you. That's residue. Let it go. Not through force, but through choice. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to move from the frequency of truth. When you begin to make decisions from coherence rather than performance, your entire field shifts, and the timeline you're on begins to bend. Reality doesn't respond to your effort. It responds to your embodiment. It doesn't care how many things you've achieved. It listens to the integrity of your vibration. This is why quantum leaps are possible. Because when your internal state changes, your external world follows. Not as magic, as physics. The observer effect in quantum mechanics tells us that reality conforms to the expectations of the one observing it. But what they don't teach you in school is that the observer is not just a mind. It's an identity. And when you become a new identity, your expectation changes, and your world must recalibrate to match it. Not gradually, immediately. This doesn't mean the new life appears overnight. But the moment you shift internally, the old life starts to dissolve. The relationships that don't fit begin to fall away. The systems you once tolerated become unbearable. Synchronicities multiply. Doors open. Energy returns. You feel a deep cellular sense of recognition. Not like you're discovering something new, but like you're remembering something ancient. This is not forward movement. This is homecoming. And home is not a place. It's a frequency. It's the moment your inner field matches the field of your original soul contract, the unedited one, the one written before fear and conformity took hold. When you live from that place, even your breath changes. You stop chasing your purpose and start embodying it. You stop trying to manifest and begin magnetizing. The struggle ends, not because life gets easier, but because you're no longer swimming against the current of who you are. If all of this feels too big, too abstract, or too far from where you are now, take a breath. You don't need to leap into a perfect future. You just need to stop betraying your present. Begin by asking yourself right now, what would I do today if I were already living the right timeline? Then do one small thing from that place. It could be speaking a truth, turning down something false, writing a page, saying no, or simply resting. But do it with the energy of the real you. Do it not to prove, but to align. That's the shift. And remember, coherence isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or external validation. It hums. It flows. It feels like breathing deeper than you've ever breathed before. And once you've felt it, there's no going back. But even coherence needs confirmation. Even a true timeline can get clouded if you don't stay attuned to it. So how do you know if you're really on your right path? How do you recognize without doubt that the timeline you're living now is yours, and not another false detour wearing a spiritual disguise? In the next section, we'll uncover exactly that. We'll show you the markers of an aligned life, the tests that signal you're still off course, and the subtle feedback your soul uses to confirm when you're finally walking your true path. Because shifting timelines is only the beginning. Staying there, that's where the real mastery begins. When you begin shifting timelines, subtly at first, then more consciously, something strange happens. The world doesn't immediately roll out a red carpet for your soul's return. In fact, there's often resistance. Old patterns will flare up. Certain people will drift away or fight to keep you exactly where you were. Your nervous system might even protest, pulling you back toward the false comfort of what's familiar. And this is where many people get confused. They wonder, am I really on the right path? Or did I just trade one distortion for another? The truth is, your soul always knows. But your mind, conditioned by years of external reference points, often doesn't know how to listen. You're used to measuring progress by applause, by metrics, by external change. But when it comes to timeline realignment, the feedback is internal. It's vibrational. It speaks in sensations, not statistics. You know you're on the right timeline when there's a sense of deeper breathing in your body, even if the external world hasn't caught up yet. You feel less like you're pushing against life and more like you're moving with it. You stop negotiating with your truth. You start making decisions that align with your knowing, even when those choices make no sense on paper. You feel yourself becoming braver without needing to perform. You stop trying to convince others because the resonance you feel is enough. You may have fewer words, but more clarity. You may face more uncertainty, yet feel more trust. There's less noise, more signal. It's not that everything becomes easy. In fact, the challenges may intensify, but the pain now has a direction. The discomfort serves growth instead of survival. You don't feel trapped by it. You feel shaped by it. That's how you know you're no longer cycling in a karmic loop. You're moving forward, not repeating. Even when nothing visible has changed, the terrain inside you has become new. You also know you're aligned when your body stops resisting. The fatigue that once clouded your days begins to lift. Your energy has space to circulate. There's a lightness in your chest. You begin to wake up with a quiet anticipation, rather than a dull dread. Creativity returns, not as a task, but as a current that flows through you. You lose interest in proving. You become obsessed with truth. Not truth as dogma, but truth as vibration. You find yourself drawn to people who speak less, but feel more. And you start to realize that coherence is not a performance to master. It's a home to return to. And yet, doubt still visits. Sometimes the voice of the old self tries to pull you back into the script. It whispers that you're crazy, selfish, lost, that the old life was safer, that the people you've outgrown need you, that what you feel now is just a phase. This voice isn't evil. It's familiar. It's the echo of the version of you that survived by staying small. It's the ghost of the identity you've outlived. You don't need to fight that voice. You only need to stop confusing it with truth. Let it speak, then let it pass. Return to resonance. Breathe into what feels aligned. Not what feels comfortable, not what feels impressive, but what feels real. That's how you stay on the true path. That's how you anchor the new timeline, moment by moment, breath by breath. There's one more thing to remember. Alignment doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like remembering. It's not a high, it's a return. When you find yourself thinking, this doesn't even feel new, it just feels like me, you're there. When you act from instinct and your soul says, finally, you're there. When the life you're living no longer feels like a performance, but like a conversation with truth, you're there. But even when you know you're aligned, the world still asks for proof. It still tests your coherence. That's why stories matter. Real stories. Human stories. Not just teachings, but lived testimony. To fully embody this shift, it helps to see how others have done it. To witness the collapse of one false identity and the rise of something more true. So in the next section, we'll walk with someone who made the shift. Someone who stepped away from the edge of performance, let go of the borrowed story, and dared to live the life that was always waiting beneath the noise. Because when one person remembers who they are, it sends a signal to the rest of us, a signal that says, you can remember too. There's something that theory can't do, no matter how precise, no matter how profound. It can't touch the place in us that needs to feel seen. It can't reach the soft, skeptical part that asks, but has anyone actually done this? That's why stories matter. Because when someone speaks not just from knowledge but from experience, a different kind of door opens. Not a doorway of concepts, but a doorway of permission. She had everything, by most definitions. A stable job with upward mobility, a marriage that looked respectable from the outside, and a tightly managed image that whispered competence, ambition, and emotional control. On paper, she was a success story. But inside, something was fraying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make silence feel heavier, enough to make joy seem distant. She'd always been someone who could push through, someone who could outwork discomfort, outrun doubt. But one morning, something small broke. It wasn't a grand collapse. It was the quiet realization that she didn't want to get up. Not because she was tired, but because she didn't want to live another day in a life that never truly felt like hers. That crack let the light in. She didn't have the words for it then. She just knew she couldn't keep pretending, so she stopped moving. She canceled meetings. She stepped away from her curated life and let herself sit in the mess. And in that stillness, a question rose, not from her mind, but from somewhere deeper. A question that would become the seed of her return. Who would I be if I stopped performing? The answer didn't come right away, but something shifted in the field. She felt the frequency of that question ripple through her body, and in that moment, she knew the shift had begun. It wasn't instant. It never is. But from that day forward, she began shedding. She stopped faking interest in conversations that bored her. She stopped twisting herself into someone her partner could understand. She let go of the idea that success had to look impressive. It wasn't rebellion, it was release. And with every layer that fell away, something truer came forward. It was slow, like thawing, but also irreversible. The people around her didn't all celebrate. Some drifted. Others accused her of changing. A few begged her to go back to how she was. But she couldn't. Because how she was never really her. And once you taste the alignment of your real timeline, the idea of returning to performance becomes unbearable. She didn't move to a mountaintop. She didn't quit everything overnight. What she did was much harder. She stayed where she was, but began to live differently, from the inside out. She changed how she made decisions. She started listening for the quiet yes instead of the loud should. She stopped forcing what didn't flow and started following what felt like home, even when it made no rational sense. A year later, the external finally began to reflect the internal. She left the job, not in a blaze of glory, but in full peace. She launched a business aligned with her deepest joy, and to her surprise, it worked. Not because she hustled harder, but because she was coherent. Her energy stopped leaking into performance and started fueling creation. She didn't find love again the way she expected. She didn't manifest a soulmate with a checklist. But she started attracting people who resonated with her actual frequency, not the frequency she had been performing to maintain. And she glowed. Not in a cinematic, filtered kind of way, but in the quiet glow of someone who is no longer hiding. The kind of glow that doesn't demand attention but shifts the air when you walk into a room. She once believed her life needed a total overhaul. What she actually needed was to come home to herself. Once she did, the life that matched her emerged, not as a reward, but as a reflection. Her story is not rare. It's just rarely spoken. Because we live in a culture that celebrates reinvention, but rarely honors release. That teaches transformation through strategy, but forgets the sacred art of surrender. But her journey proves what no theory can: that coherence is real, that timelines are flexible, and that identity is not fixed. It's fluid if you're willing to let go. And maybe the most powerful part of her story is this. She didn't do it to be extraordinary. She did it to be true. And that truth changed everything. So now, the question isn't just, is this possible? It's, are you willing? Are you willing to sit in the space between who you've been and who you truly are? Are you willing to let parts of you fall away so that something more aligned can rise? Are you willing to stop performing, even if the world around you doesn't understand right away? Because if you are, you're already halfway there. The path isn't paved by certainty. It's paved by choice. And if you can feel even the smallest yes inside you right now, then your timeline is listening. But stories like hers, and maybe stories like yours, need anchoring. They need commitment, and they need action. In the final section, we'll bring everything together. We'll name the cost of delay, the urgency of coherence, and we'll call you, not gently, but clearly, to step fully into the timeline that has been waiting for you all along. Because if not now, when? There is a lie that comfort tells. It whispers that you have time, that clarity will arrive on its own, that the pain you feel is manageable and therefore ignorable, that you can live out the rest of your days adjusting, coping, waiting. But that lie has a cost, and the longer you believe it, the more you pay. Not in money, not in measurable failure, but in something far more precious. Your alignment, your vitality, your reason for being alive at all. Every day you remain in a timeline that doesn't reflect your truth. Something within you withers. It's not dramatic at first. It's quiet. You get a little more tired, a little more resentful. Your creativity dulls. Your laughter flattens. You begin to shrink, not physically, but energetically. You become more reactive, more numb, more easily swayed by other people's energy, because your own has stopped flowing. You start losing access to the future that was once calling you, not because it disappeared, but because you drifted too far to hear it. And here's the truth no one tells you. The longer you delay coherence, the more your body begins to carry the weight. Misalignment isn't just emotional, it becomes physical. It shows up in chronic fatigue, shallow breathing, low-level anxiety that never quite resolves. Your nervous system is brilliant. It adapts to survive, but survival is not thriving. And the longer you stay in survival, the more your system starts to break down, first in subtle ways, then in louder ones. You may notice your decisions become slower, heavier. You question yourself more. You tolerate what you once would have walked away from. Your standards for what's possible begin to erode, not because you're weak, but because you're trying to build a fulfilling life on a foundation that does not match who you are. And the foundation always wins. No matter how many layers you paint over it, no matter how much effort you apply, the structure collapses when the ground beneath it is wrong. There is a point in every soul's journey when the cost of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of change. And that moment, if you're here, might be now. Because if something in you has recognized your reflection in these words, then you are no longer asleep. And once you're awake, delay is no longer neutral. It becomes avoidance, and avoidance becomes grief. The grief of unlived lives. The grief of a self you know exists, but have not yet fully become. So this is not just about shifting timelines. It's about reclaiming your aliveness. It's about understanding that your future isn't something to passively wait for. It's something to actively remember and re-enter. And that window, the one between recognition and action, is a sacred one. Miss it too many times, and you forget what alignment even feels like. You normalize disconnection. You call it adulthood. You call it stability. But deep down, you know it's something else. You know it's a slow disappearance of your soul's voice beneath the noise of everything else. This doesn't mean you need to burn your life down today, but it does mean you need to choose. Not tomorrow, now. Because the real damage is not in the delay itself. It's in what happens to your identity during the delay. You start to believe that the false self is all there is. You stop hearing the call, and eventually you stop answering it. But that doesn't have to be your story. You can begin now, right here, with a single decision to honor what you know. Not what you've been told, not what you've been trained to tolerate, but what you know. That knowing is your doorway. And the sooner you walk through it, the sooner your energy returns, your clarity sharpens, your courage grows. The sooner life begins to respond not to the version of you that's surviving, but to the version of you that's ready to live. So don't wait for a collapse to force your awakening. Don't wait for your body to scream what your heart has already whispered. Don't wait for someone else's permission. The path is already open. The question is whether you'll walk it. And if you will, then let this be your first act of coherence. Speak your yes, not out loud, not in grand gestures, but in a simple, clear commitment. The commitment to stop living the life you've been performing and start embodying the one that has been waiting. Because the real timeline is not somewhere far away. It is already coded inside you. And the moment you choose it, everything begins to move. In the final words of this journey, we'll ground that choice. We'll close not with theory, but with declaration, a ritual of remembering, a point of no return. Because if you've made it this far, then you're not just listening anymore. You're becoming. And becoming, when done consciously, changes everything. There is a moment in every real transformation when the conversation becomes a vow. Not a vow to another person, not to an audience, but to yourself. A quiet contract, signed not in ink, but in breath. A shift that doesn't need witnesses to be real. Because once spoken in the energy of full presence, it begins to ripple out into the field, shaping not just your next step, but your entire path ahead. This is that moment. Up until now, you've listened, reflected, maybe even cried. You've remembered pieces of yourself that had been buried beneath years of performance, fear, and conditioning. You've seen the patterns. You've felt the cost. And perhaps, for the first time in a long time, you've sensed the possibility of something truer. Not just as a fantasy, but as a direction, a pull, a frequency calling you home. But clarity without commitment fades. Insight without action dissolves. This is where the shift becomes real. Not when you understand, but when you choose. Not when you plan, but when you declare. So pause here, not to think, but to feel. What are you no longer available for? What version of yourself no longer gets to lead? What roles are you ready to retire? Not with resentment, but with reverence. And more importantly, who are you ready to become now that there's room? You don't need to have a perfect answer. You only need to name one thing, one thread of truth that feels like it was buried alive and is now stretching toward light. Say it, whisper it, write it, or simply feel it fully in your chest. That is your declaration. That is your ceremony. You can speak it like this. I release the story that was never mine. I return now to the life that has always been waiting. Or in your own words, words that only your soul would recognize as its own language. Words that don't impress, but liberate. You'll know they're real when you say them, and something inside you exhales. From here, it's not about speed. It's about steadiness. You're not rushing to build a new identity. You're simply allowing the old one to dissolve. You're letting your nervous system acclimate to the unfamiliar calm of truth. You're noticing how it feels to act from resonance, not obligation, to say yes without contraction, to say no without guilt. That's coherence in motion. And when you forget, and you will, you don't start over. You return. You recalibrate. You speak the declaration again, not as punishment, but as anchor. The timeline you belong to is not fragile. It won't punish you for faltering, but it will keep calling you back, again and again, until it becomes the only rhythm you live by. This journey isn't about becoming someone else. It's about unbecoming everything you never were. It's about letting go so completely that your essence is no longer filtered through anyone else's lens. And from that place, everything changes. Not because the world is different, but because your presence in it finally is. So as we close, let this be your beginning. You don't need certainty. You don't need permission. You only need to say yes to the truth that's been inside you all along. Not a future to chase, but a frequency to return to. This is your timeline now. Welcome home.